as you know, Jens, a lot of this is just having a common language for innovation.
Mm.
And our research shows that even to this day, there is no common language for innovation. And when you start thinking about the terms, let's start at the beginning. Let's start with innovation. Is there agreement across product teams as to what innovation is?
Mm.
And we know the answer is no. There isn't an agreed on definition of what innovation is, and people conflate innovation with invention. There's just a whole bunch of things that go on. And I won't get into how we define it yet, but that's just one term. A second term is a market. Every company serves markets, but how do you define a market? Companies often define them around the product itself, or a technology, or a use case, or vertical. There's no common language around which we should define a market. Of course, that's problematic. If we can't agree on what a market is, how do we agree on how to best serve a market, right?
Mm.
And as we follow that logic, the next step is customer needs. We know that. It's pretty obvious, that the way to succeed at innovation is to better satisfy customers' needs. Nobody would argue with that. But our data shows that 90% of product teams disagree on what a customer need even is. Again, this is a language of innovation issue. Do they define a need around a feature, a product? Is it around as an exciter or a delighter? Is it latent? Is it articulated? Is it a specification, a requirement? I could go on, right? But there is no agreed on definition of what a need is. And I find this amazing because we did some work 10, 15 years back where we looked at the top uh, voice of the customer practitioners in the US. And I think we looked at 15 of them and asked them, how do they define customer needs?
Mm.
Well, not surprising, we had 15 different answers. And I think that's the heart of the problem, right? If we can't agree on what a customer need is, then how are we going to agree what the needs are and which needs are unmet? And how are we going to agree if there's segments of people with different unmet needs, right? And the answer is we can't. So that's an obvious problem. I think another term um, that's interesting is the term segment, a market segment. How do you define a market segment? Is it around a vertical? Is it around a demographic, a psychographic classification scheme, some attitudes, behaviors? There's no agreed on best way to define a segment. Now, what I find interesting about this is I think everyone agrees on why we're trying to segment, right? We're trying to segment markets so we can find groups of people with different unmet needs, right? And companies will often use proxies to do this, like I said, demographics, psychographics, and so on. And the reason they don't do it straightforward and segment around customer needs directly is because there's no agreement what a need is. So, companies are stuck in this circular loop, if you will, a recursive loop where we're all trying to come up with solutions that address unmet needs through the innovation process, but we don't agree on what the innovation process is. We don't agree on what a market is, what needs are, or what segments are.